Chris, I would say, though, for this defense, I think there will be times that you're going to see them give up those little chunk plays in the running game. And they're really
Mhm.
not your chunk plays like 10, 15, 20 yards. I'm talking more 7, 8, stuff like that. But I think their athleticism up front and just their ability to get off blocks also allows them to create some of those negative plays, some of those plays that gets an opponent off their down and distance projections. And so I think for Carolina, this defense, when they can get teams in third and longs and passing situations, much like they did against Kentucky, I mean, they're 2 for 2 on teams just absolutely not being able to block them. Like,
Yeah.
will there be fronts that give them a little bit more of a, threat up front in terms of being able to pass protect? Obviously, but 2 for 2 in that realm, and, I mean, it was relentless, dude. Like, let's give credit. Like, this was a deep group. I thought Clayton White called a great game, and I thought they mixed it up just enough. Like, it would have been kind of easy to say, all right, let's just rush four guys. We're getting pressure. Let's just sit back. But I thought he was just aggressive enough. Like, it wasn't that they were overly aggressive, but there was an early, trying to think of when the situation was, Chris. There was a third and long, and it was when it was kind of obvious already that the Carolina defense was taking control of this game. And they did that little like double mug where you have both linebackers in the A gap, and it's third and long. And I'm like, oh, that's going to be a simulated pressure. Like they're making Kentucky account for those two guys, and then they're going to drop back, which is something Carolina does quite a bit of. And no, I mean, they sent six guys. It looked like a zero pressure on a third and long, which I think Kentucky's probably thinking, oh, they're getting pressure with four. They're not going to add on additional guys in this situation. But so I thought they did just enough. They were blitzing Vakari Swain, who I want to get to at some point. They were blitzing him off the edge from cornerback spot. Like it wasn't an overly aggressive to where you're like, that's a little reckless, but it was more like we're gonna do just enough different things to keep them guessing while simultaneously knowing we can rush for shoot at times, Chris, rush three and get pressure.
Yeah, it really was. I thought it was a versatile, varied defensive game plan to where they could do some different things. Somebody asked Beamer on the Sunday teleconference, "Hey, why did y'all come out in 3-man? You ended up running a lot of 4-man." And it was just a matchup type thing, right? And even on that first drive, I think they were able to, and this was a frustrating point for Mark Stoops that he brought up later. They were able to create some of those negative plays, Wes, and I think that's going to be a hallmark of this defense. You go back to, I think it was the first drive for Kentucky. They get what, 8 or 9 yards running some type of inside run. Then they try to run sideways on a jet sweep, and Jalen Kilgore comes up and makes a tackle for loss, right? That is kind of their identity as a defense. They'll give up some plays here and there. I think the key for this team is don't do what you did against Old Dominion, right? That's the part that they cleaned up for the most part. You didn't have two long, explosive scoring plays. If you're going to take your chances on an offense, just kind of going up and down the field on you. This is something Ellis Johnson used to talk a lot. People say they don't like bend but don't break, but in reality, if you're asking a college offense to go up against a pretty good college defense and put together a 10, 12 play, 75-yard drive, that's actually pretty hard. That's a lot of opportunities for an offense to screw something up. And so we saw Kentucky put together, really, Wes, I think one good drive. It's when they ran the ball like 10, 12 straight times. They drove it down, but South Carolina was able to keep them out of the end zone. They were able to string together some big negative plays for Kentucky. A lot of those throughout the day were penalties. Now, the OC Bush Hampton, who we said good things about going into this game, Mark Stoops, who I think we say nice things about how Mark Stoops prepares his team, things like that. They wanted to talk about self-inflicted wounds a lot. Most of those were caused by South Carolina.
Mhm.
There's a difference between committing a dumb penalty and committing a penalty because the opposite team is causing you, forcing you into those errors and overwhelming you. So when you look at, maybe not the illegal motions, things like that, that Kentucky had a couple times, but the holding penalties, I don't even remember how many there were. Those were caused by South Carolina. And no better distillation of that, Wes. I remember there was one play, South Carolina got a big play. Kentucky was backed up. You had Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart both getting off the ground, putting their hands up because they got held. They both got held on the same play. Um, and I don't even know if that one was actually called, but they forced Kentucky into so many errors throughout the day, so many negative plays. And I mean, you can boil it down looking at Brock Vandegrift's stat line, right? 3 for 10, 30 yards, just completely overwhelmed Kentucky's front.
That's one of the best stat lines I've ever seen
For
for a
defense.
Carolina defense, like, to
Yeah.
do that to a quarterback, in a long time, man. So that was impressive. Even when you go back and look, like, I felt like Kentucky would maybe look back at this score and be like, "Hey, maybe we should have just ran the ball up the middle the entire game and just see what happens." But I think a big part of Carolina being able to win the game and kind of put the game away, in my opinion, was that the offense, and I don't want to quite get away from the defense yet, so we'll get to offense in a second, but the offense was able to sort of stack on and add on in the third quarter, as opposed to this just being a defensive slugfest. I think if it's a defensive slugfest, if I'm Kentucky, I'm going to say, look, we're just going to grind this thing out. Like, we're going to go 90% run and barely throw the ball and see what happens. But once the game, from a game flow standpoint, once Carolina sort of stacks on in the third quarter in terms of points, you really can't do that. So, but I thought, Chris, and this is a little bit anecdotal, but for one, when Kentucky did have that room to run, I felt like Carolina like flowed to the ball pretty well and shut it down before you saw bigger chunks. I thought when Kentucky got, in my opinion, and I'm huge on fourth down. Like, I always love, like, Spurrier was ahead of his time in saying, "Hey, fourth and short, we're just going to go for it. We're going to try to stay on the field." And you know, I, I'm all for aggressiveness most of the time. And now all the analytics say basically if it's fourth and one, I think the analytics say if it's fourth and one on your own 10, you should go for it or something. But Kentucky, I thought, got a little bit impatient considering where the game was and considering at the time Sellers was not in the game for South Carolina. So you're you're dealing with a backup quarterback at that point on the other side. And we've seen Beamer go for it on fourth and one in his own territory as well. Like, if you get it, nobody questions it whatsoever. And they were running the ball pretty well at the time. But I did think that was a little bit impatient of a call. And also, Carolina on both offense and defense made the high leverage plays. Like, all the plays that could have swung this game one way or the other,
Yes.
Carolina made almost all of them. Like, they got a stop on their fourth and one. On Carolina's fourth and one, they do the little trick play, bring Brady Hunt over like they're going to direct snap it to him for a tight end quarterback sneak, and Kentucky jumps. Um, most of the Carolina converts some long third downs. Kentucky did not. South Carolina, for the most part, scores touchdowns. Kentucky, in their two situations where they did, one, they have a good drive. The other, you look like you're getting a gift in the interception at the end of the half, and you have to kick a field goal. Like, to me, the plays you look back that were like in the balance, Carolina made them. Now, including being able to fall on a couple of fumbles. Our guy Michael Beckham, who is Beckham on the forum, Might be a different game if Carolina can't fall on those fumbles at the
Yep.
beginning of the 3rd quarter. At the same time, you go back and look, dude, Kentucky had, I think, 4 fumbles in this game as well, so it's not like both sides didn't put the ball on the turf a little bit.
Yeah, and Kentucky was able to grab some of those as well. I mean, the best instance, West, was where Kamar Bell somehow came up with that ball that squirted out and rolled around on the ground, and it looked like I think maybe Deion Walker for Kentucky's really good defensive tackle had it, and Kamar somehow came up with it. So those were huge. But that's a great point.